back. Welcome back to the Watches and Style channel. I'm here with you for the third installment of my new series that focuses on iconic models and how they perform on the secondary market, specifically in auction results, references and auction results. RAAR, or like a lion's roar for short. I'm very excited today because even though this is the third installment, it's really more than just that. First of all, I'm not sure if I could fit this watch into a single episode. We are, after all, going to talk about one of the most iconic Rolex sports watches of all time, perhaps the most iconic sports watch of all time. That's the Rolex Cosmograph Daytona. And when you look at this model, when you look at the Daytona, perhaps there's no better example as to how certain high auction results affect the rest of the market and affect the perception of the watch among collectors and even within mainstream pop cultural consciousness. And if the Daytona has a larger than life image in mainstream consciousness, the Paul Newman Daytona has an even stronger and a more specific one. So I thought of no better place to start talking about the Daytona with the Paul Newman variations specifically. And it's also a good way to cover really a lot of the main variations of vintage Daytonas, of Rolex Daytonas that were built on the base of two distinct generations of Varjou movements. And this will probably build for us a good platform to talk about other variations in the 4-digit era and even the 5-digit era as we unfold this enormous topic. Of course, we are going to talk about two 5-digit watches as well that were recently sold by Sotheby's from Paul Newman's own collection. Because I want to start by talking about what Paul Newman's own image plays with, perhaps, the image of this watch, and how his watches that were sold on auctions affected the entire market by and large, really lifting up basically every flavor of the Daytona within the auction circuit, most certainly, but even well beyond elsewhere on the secondary market. Now, the reason that the exotic dial Paul Newman Daytonas, such as the 6239 that Paul Newman is wearing now on this photograph on a bone strap of crocodile leather, has this apocryphal story, an origin story, so to speak, long before this watch itself was discovered and sold on public auction. Italian collectors had already taken to calling variations of the vintage Daytona with the so-called exotic dial with the proper name Paul Newman, and that had apparently to do with the fact that the famous star, probably one of the most decent men, as he's called in Hollywood, um, was seen posing in a similar fashion to this photograph, wearing this particular watch on a magazine cover in Italy. Now, the reason I call this an apocryphal story is because no one really was able to reproduce this magazine cover specifically. And oftentimes the myth sometimes not only precedes but overtakes history, and vintage Rolex watches are perhaps the best examples of those, right? You all know that the original Rolex Explorer 2s are called Steve McQueen, for example, even though the famous actor was never photographed with one, and certainly no Rolex Explorer 2 has ever emerged from his collection. So there's no proof whatsoever that Steve McQueen has worn or even owned one of those, yet they are associated with his name. So we could have had perhaps a similar story about Paul Newman's watch. Um, One, if it had never resurfaced, uh, and if he actually had not worn it so frequently. And that has a very important, very significant reason. Because this watch was actually a personal gift to him by his wife, the Academy Award winning actor Joanne Woodward. You see, here's another photograph, this time with a denim shirt rather than that crisp white Oxford with a button-down collar. It's always nice if you can color coordinate your eyes with your shirt. Unfortunately, some of us are not that fortunate. I love the color blue, but can't really match it with my eyes. Never mind, it is that great watch again, the 6239, which remains not only one of the most iconic watches, but also the most expensive watch to have ever sold in public auction. And here is another shot of this. This is a reference 6239, and we will study the details, the distinct qualities that set apart such exotic dials. But for now, we can just note that it is the original early reference, which started to be produced with these sorts of dials around mid 60s. And it is the example with pump pushers and the matching metal bezel for the tachometer. And the case back is very meaningfully inscribed, since Paul Newman was actually very fond of and very serious about motorsports himself, about racing. His wife, who had personally gifted this watch from him, probably having bought it from Tiffany and Company, had it inscribed with "Drive carefully, me, and you'll see that this refrain will come up in similar ways, in familiar ways, with other inscriptions from Joanne Woodward's personal gifts to him. And experts such as Eric Wind are quite sure that this watch was bought from Tiffany's, both by the font of the caseback inscription and also the inventory number that is quite primitively carved onto the back of the lug here, as you can see. This particular piece was sold in October 2017 by Phillips New York for roughly 17.8 million US dollars. And to my knowledge, that guarantees in perpetuity, among many other things, the summer camps that Newman's own foundation organizes for socioeconomically underprivileged children in the summers. So it, for once, actually that the proceeds from an auction with the purpose of charity went to a good purpose. This was another one from Paul Newman's own collection, a so-called Big Red. It's a 6263. Again, a record-breaking watch, having been sold once again by Phillips New York, this time in December 2020, for roughly $5.5 million. This one is called Big Red. So even though it is a Paul Newman, it is a Daytona owned by Paul Newman, these are usually not the pieces that are called Paul Newman Daytonas. So that's good. That's a good thing to take note of. But you will see that a lot of the design details that have been resurrected to celebrate what was the 60th anniversary of the iconic model this year, with the inauguration of the new family of Daytona models, so to speak, under the 1265XX generation, so to speak. You'll see a lot of the visual details have been now adopted or revitalized in this generation. Of course, the way that the now ceramic but then plastic bezel is set into a metal ring that matches the metal of the case is one detail. And of course, the dial doesn't quite look similar to this generation, because obviously a lot of times what happens on the dial of a watch, how things are laid out on the dial of a watch, have more to do with its mechanism than simply an aesthetic idea or a visual afterthought, right? So in fact, the dial, I think, of the new generation of the Daytona reflects much more the Zenith Daytona, the first generation of the self-winding Rolex sports chronographs that were introduced in 1988, building upon the Zenith El Primero caliber 400 base. But that is another topic altogether. This Big Red, which was the second one to come out of Paul Newman's collection, was sold for $5.5 million in December 2020 by Phillips New York. And of course, it's called Big Red because of the particular prominence of the red Daytona writing at 6 o'clock. And this one is similarly but differently inscribed on the case back as well, with a personal note from Joanne Woodward, who is in this instance mentioned by name, and it's now Drive Slowly. And it's actually quite an entertaining theme, and I think a very touching reflection of their relationship, that the older model would be inscribed Drive Carefully, this one Drive Slowly, and we will see that her last gift to her beloved husband would be inscribed Drive Very Slowly, as if to try to calm him down as he aged, as he became perhaps more physically frail and vulnerable, as we all, of course, do. 6263, plastic bezel, screw-down pushers, which really bring home the fact that this is an oyster cosmograph, right? The screw-down pushers basically ensure the more rigorous waterproofness of the case. More recently, this time, Sotheby's New York sold two more Daytonas, two more Rolex Oyster Cosmographs from Paul Newman's personal collection. You are seeing one of them on Paul Newman's wrist in this picture. He is wearing the Zenith Daytona we were just talking about, reference 16520. Incidentally, it was the 25th anniversary of the first generation of automatic Daytonas this year as well, which I think was one of the reasons as to why the dial arrangement in terms of both the more slender and slightly more elongated indices for the hour markers, and what I find also the sleeker outer rings for the chronograph registers for the subdials were brought back with the 126500, which I think is a throwback to the 5-digit in the same way that the bezel insert is a throwback to such references as the 6263, which had a plastic bezel insert into a inset into a metal ring. This reference 16520 from Paul Newman's personal collection was in fact a gift by Rolex because in 1995, actually, Paul Newman and his team won their category at the 24 hours at Daytona. And Paul Newman at the time became the oldest driver to actually win a sanctioned, officially sanctioned race, and thus became, as the inscription here memorializes, the Rolex Motorsports Man of the Year in 1995. So whoever got this watch, I think in my estimation, in the longer term, may have gotten themselves a decent deal. Both of the pieces that were sold in that June auction went for more than $1 million US, 1.1 specifically. And I think they're both significant and sentimental in their own way. And considering how the OG Paul Newman, the 6239, actually went to Rolex, who has, especially more recently, especially in the last couple of years, seems to have seized very consciously the legacy of this particular watch. They seem to have, I think, more consciously collecting significant vintage pieces, rare examples. I think in the last couple of auction seasons in Geneva especially, it was quite apparent that the Rolex representative in the room was most enthusiastic and largely successful in securing most of the historically significant pieces. And if they are not necessarily, I don't know how this is developing. As you know, Rolex is decidedly not transparent about their inner workings. I don't know if they are building, in fact, their own museum, but they are certainly very consciously building a collection. The Paul Newman Daytona was loaned to the Academy, basically, which has displayed it in the green room at the Academy Award ceremonies. And I think at a certain point, it was in the Peterson Automotive Museum here in Los Angeles. And nowadays, Paul Newman's Daytona is actually in the new Academy Museum, which is basically right across the street from the Peterson Museum. So there is, if Rolex was, as I was growing up, known to even frown upon their own vintage models, in many instances, modernizing and, from my perspective, destroying them in service. These days, they seem to have become much more positively conscious of the net value that vintage, good, honest, and historically significant and rare vintage examples add to their own brand value. And I think this is also reflected in their efforts of establishing a unique and singular workshop in Geneva, where they specialize in restoring in a period-correct manner their own vintage watches. Atelier de Restauration in Geneva, the restoration workshop in Geneva. The second watch that was sold, and this is also a very touching picture of Paul Newman. This was about a month before he passed away. They actually closed the Lime Rock Parkway in August of 2008, to allow Paul Newman to basically do his last laps on the circuit. So this is a photo taken at that time, and the watch he's wearing there, which is a reference 116519, white gold with a black dial, presented as they were at the time on a leather strap with a matching déployant clasp. A similar, slightly earlier photo capturing Paul Newman with the same watch on the wrist. And here is the way it was presented before it was sold by Sotheby's. This one is also the last in the series of those personal gifts from Joanne Woodward to Paul Newman. And it's inscribed in a more modern way and font with "Drive very slowly, Joanne." JB, thank you so much. Thank you for being here first and foremost, and thank you for your generous super chats. 1999. Thank you so much. So much like the Zenith Daytona in stainless steel, this piece was also sold in June of this year by Sotheby's New York for around 1.1 million US dollars. And again, the 5-digit variations, and even perhaps some of the modern models that are inspired by certain features of Paul Newman Daytonas, the exotic dial Daytonas, pieces that are similar to or exactly like the lesser or less favorable, less demanded pieces from Paul Newman's collection. We will probably end up talking about them in another installment, but I'm still gonna try my best to fit in some further examples as well. But these were the 4 famous Daytonas that have emerged over time from Paul Newman's collection. Paul Newman has been photographed with other watches, of course, with other Daytonas specifically. So I'm sure others might surface in the auction circuit in due time, but you have already seen the trend. The first is the most important. And I think within this genre, and you can think about the genre not only as Paul Newman's watches, but perhaps watches that are sprinkled with the stardust of a celebrity with a pedigree like Paul Newman's. I don't think the kind of price that was reached here will be bested anytime soon. I'm not gonna beat the dead horse about how the Daytona was initially unpopular and therefore didn't really sell well, and that it was in a way outmoded and antiquated until the dawn of the new millennium and until the introduction of Rolex's in-house caliber. But I do want to at least bring that into the discussion, if only to emphasize the rarity of a lot of the pieces that we will discuss today. Here's a nice spread of distinct variations of the Paul Newman Daytona. And that is relevant to us in 2 important ways. simply because the fact that these pieces did not necessarily sell well ends up making them much more rare because of the limited production, because of the limited numbers, right? Whatever watch is seemingly less in demand also ends up becoming collectible in a certain way, not in a way that it is fated or decreed. Don't take me wrong. Not everything that is more rare is by definition more collectible or more valuable. But in this instance, that is certainly the case. The other reason that origin story is so important is because it's also part of how collectors and experts explain the emergence of the exotic dial, right? Because the model itself is introduced in 1963, first as incidentally as Le Mans, renamed and rebranded quite quickly, mainly with the North American market in mind, as the Daytona. And it is, the conjecture is that these Singer dials were created to generate a little more visual interest and an increased and intensified aesthetic appeal on the face of the watch. And hindsight is 2020, of course, but I think once the collectors have become wiser to the existence of these watches, to the rarity of these watches, to the pedigree of these watches, they were just so easy to love, because compared to a run-of-the-mill Daytona dial, as we have seen in the Big Red, perhaps, there's just so much more depth, so much more dimensionality in an exotic dial. Now, let's focus on some details, and we are starting with the 6239. Right, mid 60s is the point of origin, more or less, for the introduction of these dials. The tricolor dials with either a white or black background, contrasting chronograph registers, and it is a stepped dial, right? So, in fact, the seconds track that is distinguished by the red hash marks is in fact a sunken perimeter around the center of the dial, which already gives you a sense of depth, which already in a way pulls you into the watch. Furthermore, you can pay attention to the radial grooves in the chronograph registers, which, save for very limited exceptions, cover the entirety of the subdials. Once again, a nice point of contrast from the rest of the face. Those subdials are further distinguished by the very specific font, an Art Deco font that is used, to say nothing of the squared and hashes that mark the intervals. And the running seconds at 9 is actually distinguished by the numerals at the quarters rather than the 60, 20, 40 of the usual, the regular, the conventional versions of the Daytona, as you can see here on the 6263 Big Red, for example. And another nice detail, again, I think sometimes, you know, dial makers, unless we are talking about a certain flavor of enamel painting or wooden marqueterie or something like that, they're usually not given credit for the kind of aesthetic detail and design acumen that they brought to their work. And one of the details that I really love, again, is how those squared ends for the hash marks in chronograph registers actually match the hour markers. Right? Oftentimes, you know, I'm not going to single out any brands or any models. I don't want to get distracted. But oftentimes, it is this kind of cohesion, it's this kind of coherence in design that we crave in modern watches. Right? And again, you know, Rolex in mid to late 60s is already a mass-produced watch. Don't take me wrong, right? We are not really talking about singular artisanal products here, but you can see clearly both in terms of the idea that is reflected in the design and in terms of the examples that were produced from it, you can still see a much more distinguished, a much more pronounced mark of artistry compared to a contemporary piece. And now that we singled that out, actually, I do want to take a quick look at the much desired Le Mans Centennial edition, so to speak, the white gold Rolex Daytona that is very uniquely released by Rolex to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the famous endurance race. There are many theories about the exact status of this watch within the Rolex lineup. Is it here to stay? Is it going to be exclusive to the year? After all, the centenary takes place only once in 100 years. Is it going to be replaced by something slightly different, which is something that Rolex loves doing from one year to the next? These are all open questions. What is not, I think, contested in any way is the fact that the 126 529 LN is incredibly rare and one of the most difficult pieces to acquire that is in the current lineup of Rolex watches. This piece is also one of the few Rolex timepieces that are given the exhibition caseback treatment. So you actually have a nice view of the movements on the back, which is lovely skeletonized rotor, giving at least a flavor of racing wheel. A nicely finished movement, which is unique to this particular model. It's the 4132. Again, beyond the exhibition caseback and the visual treatment, the aesthetic treatment it receives, as you can probably see in that picture, it also has a 24-hour counter rather than a 12-hour counter, as you can see. At 9 o'clock. Of course, with the introduction of Rolex in-house movements, with the 4130, at the turn of the millennium, the continuous running seconds has shifted to 6 o'clock. As you can see, the layout of the second subdial at 6, which was at 9 in the OG Paul Newman exotic dial, is not at the quarters, but at 20, 40, 60. And furthermore, the font of the numerals is very distinctly not the exotic dial, pardon me, Art Deco font. It's perhaps more similar to the font that was used in other Daytonas, but most certainly the hash marks at the intervals have square ends, which is of course a very clear, very obvious throwback to the exotic dial iteration of the Rolex Daytona. I think that is a very nice touch, and I also believe that the particular treatment of the black dial, which kind of gives it anthracite grayish depth, also constitutes a similar throwback, right? Kind of like a weathered black rather than something that is pitch black. This is, of course, the white gold on the oyster flex. Which is 126519 LN, if I'm not mistaken. And that, as I was mentioning, has slightly more extended, this particular generation, slightly more extended hour markers. What to me is a slightly more elegant and contrasting presentation of the chronograph registers. And again, a clear, if that is a throwback to the 5-digit 16520 Zenith Daytonas, the new approach to the ceramic bezels as they are now inserted into a matching metal ring certainly takes us back to the hand-wound Daytonas, which constitutes our subject today. So we talked about the 6239, which is the one with the matching metal bezel. In the Paul Newman version, the 3-color or tricolor exotic dial and pump pushers. The movement, the beating heart of the watch is the Vajra-based caliber 722, which beats at 18,000 semi-oscillations per hour, and that is 2.5 hertz. Of course, we have the two main variations between the white backdrop and the black backdrop. In each case, a sunken seconds track distinguished by the red hash marks, matching square hour markers that go along with the square end hash marks within the chronograph registers. The pump pushers and the matching metal bezel for the tachometer. Next up, we have the 6241, which, again, in terms of its inner qualities, in terms of its mechanism, does not differ from the 6239, but in terms of its visual aesthetic, in terms of how it looks on the wrist, I think it's quite different. Here you see, again, black plastic insert for the tachometer within a metal ring. And especially with the white version of the aesthetic dial, that depth and the interplay of minor differences, the slight contrast that I was talking about, has been even more dramatized. And I think this is probably one of the most interesting versions, most captivating versions of the Paul Newman Daytona, right? Whenever you have the black bezel insert in combination with a white exotic dial in 3 colors. I think that's, to me at least, personally, that's one of the most aesthetically pleasant versions. And as I said, whatever the history was, whatever the market was for these pieces at the point of their origin, once people have woken up to their rarity and pedigree, what is not to love, right? There's a lot of interest, a lot of depth, a lot of playful contrast in the dial without getting to that level where it becomes comical. But again, that's just me. Here's an example. I do apologize for the quality of the picture of the 6241 with a black exotic dial, and you can see, even though perhaps the interplay of those contrasting colors is not as dramatic, but you still have that line of separation between the sunken seconds track, because again, the Paul Newman exotic dial is a step dial or a stepped dial. So you have both a different color and a different level when you think of the black center dial, white sunken seconds track, and then the black bezel inserted into a metal ring. Next up, we have a transitional model. The two references that we will discuss back to back right here were basically only made for about 1 year. Just to have the coherence, I mostly chose the visuals with oyster bracelets. I guess, quote unquote, that's canonical, that's iconic, but obviously these watches were sold at times without bracelets, and sometimes according to the preference of the buyer with Jubilee bracelets as well. So there are very distinct and elegant examples of those, both in stainless steel and in yellow gold as well. So I don't want you to think that that doesn't exist for whatever reason, but I wanted to have some sort of visual coherence. So chose models with oyster bracelets for the most part, if I could. The 6262 we are looking at right now, the so-called transitional model that is produced at the end of the decade for about a year, visually is extremely similar to the 6239, the OG Paul Newman, Newman's own, no pun intended, Daytona that we were looking at. However, this actually features the higher beat caliber, once again built on the Vajou base, the caliber 727. And as you can see, there are examples of these transitional models with or without the red accents on the seconds track. The white dial example we are looking at right now does not have the red accents on the sunken seconds track, but the black one does. And as you can see, visually, the 6262 at first glance is very similar, at least in photographs, with the 6239, pump pushers, metal bezel, oftentimes the same tricolor exotic dials with the Art Deco numerals and crosshair, square and hash marks, so on and so forth in the chronograph registers. However, they feature the new generation, the 3 Hertz, 21,600 semi-oscillations per hour, Vajou 727 compared to the caliber 722, which powers the 6239 and 6241. And of course, this can be, depending on your perspective, this can be a drawback or this can be a selling point even. The higher bead caliber means the case is also slightly thicker, right? So maybe a little bit more wrist presence, maybe a little bit more of a modern feel, although I wouldn't want to overstate that difference. But the 6262 is a thicker watch than the 6239. And that is due to the newer generation movements that powers it. Next up, and once again, I do apologize for the quality of the picture, but thankfully I have two. Once again, we are looking at the 6264. Its main distinction from the 6262 being the black bezel. Once again, that distinct interplay of both the three colors and the contrasts of levels and colors that distinguish this watch. Otherwise, we have pump pushers. Again, and of course, as we go back here, in retrospect, you will recognize one of the distinct branding elements of Rolex missing from the dial in name, and that is Oyster, which brings us to the next generation. This is the new decade, 1970, and we have Rolex Oyster Cosmograph, finally, right, where you have these screw down pushers that actually secures, that shores up, that tightens up the oyster-like waterproof properties of the case. These screw down pushers, by the way, as you can see, perhaps with the finer fluting, so to speak, of it are an early example that the Italians call mille righe. And you'll see something following upon at least certain examples of the transitional models. The third color, the red accents disappear. So the visuals of the dial is a much more quote-unquote simplified panda with the white backdrop, which gives it the traditional panda look, or the black. Oops, that's not it. Or the black version of this, which of course I have to immediately get for you. I don't know how that's snuck in there, but please accept my apologies. I don't know where I had that picture. Okay, that's very strange. Mm. Right here. My apologies again. This is example of the 62, 65 with a black dial. And next up we have what many consider to be the apogee in the series. Again, I do have a certain hot spot for the red accents that distinguish some of the transitional models, so to speak. I also love pump pushers as well. Obviously, these are vintage watches. I don't know many people who wear Paul Newman Daytonas on a regular or daily basis, but I presume, by and large, in humid conditions, you might feel more at ease. You might be able to put your mind at ease when you have screw-down pushers rather than pump style pushers. I don't know. All of that being said, of course, there's a reason why people kind of migrate over to the oyster versions, because they preserve most of the visual aesthetic of the original Paul Newman references, such as the 6239, but add on top of it not only the black bezel inserts, but also genuine, according to Hoyle, oyster case with screw-down pushers, which of course go a significant way to enhance the waterproof properties of the watch. Now, one of the ways to understand how rare some of the variations of this watch is to look at the precious metal examples. Oh, here we are. This is a black dial version of the 6263. as we were looking at here. I was saying one of the ways to understand how rare these pieces can be is to look at the precious metal examples, at the gold examples. This is 6241. I'm sure by now you can kind of connect the dots, right? You have the pump pushers, you have the plastic bezel inserts, the black bezel. So what you're seeing is the 6241 with the Vajou 722, Vajou base 722 caliber. These were made in 14 carats yellow gold for the American markets and 18 karat for elsewhere. So incidentally, the quote-unquote lower grade of the gold, which is in more limited number and which is rarer, can hold a noticeable premium, and they are understood to be about 400 examples of these, and the black dial of the gold versions is perhaps one of the most desirable permutations, so to speak. They are affectionately called the John Player Special by the collectors, because their peculiar combination of black and gold is quite reminiscent of the livery of Team Lotus cars, which were, of course, at that time harkening back to the cigarette brand John Player, with their logo as well, black with gold accents. So this is a John Player Special, a reference 6241. The dials that go with the gold, the exotic dials that go with the gold Daytonas, can be like this, can be champagne color, which is the precious metal counterpart to the white, to the panda, with contrasting chronograph registers, and of course the second track. And finally, there is a lemon dial, as they call, a Grenet lemon dial with this grained texture that is probably the rarest, and we'll talk about a few examples that have been sold for quite a significant premium very recently. I'm gonna take a very small break here. I'm going to be with you shortly. All right, we are back. So I was talking about how Rolex has over time become wiser to the significance of these models, to the pedigree of these models, to the hold they have not only on the imagination of the average watch collector, but also on the mainstream enthusiast as well. And in fact, this particular example of what we were just looking at, the 6241 Jump Player Special, was in fact apparently acquired by the Rolex representative in the room last May 14th, specifically at Sotheby's Geneva. Imported Watches Part 1, where it was Lot 119, and it was sold for more than 2.2 million in Swiss francs. And again, this was a watch probably rather distinguished by its condition, very beautiful piece, but clearly of historical interest to Rolex. Because it is set to have attracted the interest of and ultimately a successful winning bid from none other than the company, the crown itself. More recently, in fact, a little more than a week ago, Sotheby's in New York sold an example of the JPS once again, the 6241 with the black exotic dial that goes with it, the so-called Jump Player Special dial for the Paul Newman. Plastic bezel, pump pushers. This particular Jump Player Special was distinguished by the impeccable condition, basically. There was not even bracelet marks on the back of those lugs, because apparently the watch was born without one, testifying to the options I was talking about earlier. I can certainly imagine someone wanting a gold version of the Daytona to wear it on a leather strap. To me, that makes a lot of sense. Maybe that's not always the case. But either way, that allowed this watch to be preserved in an exceptional condition. And this Jump Player Special at Important Watches, Sotheby's New York, as Lot 103, actually sold for more than $1.5 million in US dollars. which is an interesting lesson, right? The one way to look at it is that Sotheby's very successfully sold a jump player special recently, which makes people come out of the woodwork to offer their jump player special, being encouraged by that result, thinking it is the perfect moment to sell. But it also is a lesson in how a watch in exceptional condition can take a significant premium, right? Even when Rolex is not in the room, right? Rolex was in the room. It sold for more than 2.2 in Swiss francs. In New York, Rolex wasn't in the room, but what was in the room was an example of the reference 6241 jump player special in singular condition, in an exceptionally well-preserved condition, and that broke in and of itself 1.5 million. And I think that's even more dramatic in a way when you contrast it with another recent result, another precious metal Daytona sold by yet another, a different prominent auction house, but in the same city, a couple of days after that. This is a lemon Paul Newman, a 6264 with that lemon colored granular dial. 6264, of course, is, there you go, for a nice detail of that version of the dial that is called lemon, which is quite distinct from champagne. And of course, the 6264 means pump pushers, and it means a plastic bezel inserts, which goes into the matching metal ring, which in this case is, of course, in 18 carats yellow gold. And the reason I wanted to pull this up immediately is, again, just a few days apart, just several blocks apart, but two beautiful condition pieces, two rare pieces. And even though the lemon is possibly more rare than both the champagne dial version and the black dial one, the so-called jump player special, it still testifies to how condition is the most important value, because Sotheby's sold that jump player special for 1.5 million, the one that was not even touched by the bracelet, so to speak. And here You have a 6264, once again in quite a, nice condition, don't take me wrong, with the matching bracelets, with the rare lemon dial. And that came close to breaking the seven figures, breaking into the seven figures, but did actually sell for 965,200 in US dollars. Thank you for being here, by the way. Please please hit the like button. And try not to distract from the actual topic of conversation, if at all possible. Yeah, I don't know what else to say. Really an exceptional watch, and its rarity is, of course, quite an important mark, but sometimes condition can trump that particular feature. So let's take a look now that we have talked about the broader variety of these pieces. I do want to pull up that nice spread once again. And I think now you would be armed yourself to know which one is which, right? When looking at this picture, I'm sure you are already educated enough to match these with the reference numbers, right? The 6239, 6241, again, this 62. There's a jump player special there, 6241. This is the 6262. And then the two oyster references, so to speak, the 6265 with the matching metal bezel and the 6263 with the black bezel. Actually, since we were talking about the jump player special, I do want to highlight what may be called the modern version of it. It got quite popular in the previous generation, right? I'm talking about the 116518 LN. It's not a one-to-one remake by any stretch of the imagination. Don't take me wrong. Right here we have the jump player special, which can be likened to the 116518. Let's see. Let's find the good photo of it right here. And again, perhaps these modern renditions make you appreciate the nuances, the design details, and the contrasting depth that goes into such a watch, as the original jump player special, whereas you have in the 116518 LN kind of a modern, a contemporary take on it with distinct differences, of course. This model has been largely preserved in the lineup. Of course, there are some small details, some minor distinctions. I believe off the top of my mind, the centrally deployed chronograph seconds hand is no longer red. That's the biggest difference. That's the biggest distinction from the 116518 to 126518 LN. And of course, more faithfully to the older version, now you have this time the ceramic bezel set into the ring rather than plopped down naked around the crystal. And I think it's just the details seem a little finer on this version. I like it a little bit better, but once again, you see how distinct those exotic dials were with that stepped aesthetic, with that sunken track for the seconds, which I think just really ends up being a beautiful detail. So now I want to take you around for the auction results, and I don't want to depress you in any way. So we will mostly look at how the trends really have been shaping up before and after the pandemic, on either side of the pandemic, so to speak. And again, how these prices are trending today. So we're going to look at the 6239 first. You see there are actually very interesting results. You guys know I'm quite a fan of the In Eichen auction house based in Zurich, mostly because you can find some interesting examples such as this one with the black dial 6239. Again, not necessarily the one in the most enviable condition, perhaps not abiding by the highest standards you set for a watch like this. And clearly that's a very important thing to establish, right? Because many will say you either belong to that segment or not, right? Not everyone can drop around $250,000 for a watch, right? So if you are aspiring to it in any way, some might say if you're dropping that much money on the watch, you should really be getting the best one that you can afford, or nothing at all. And I don't necessarily disagree with that perspective, right? But then again, sometimes we're just looking for a bargain. So in this case, this was 6239, sold by In Eichen Zurich just a week ago for less than 160,000 in US dollars. And as you guys know, if you're familiar with this channel at all, that's an auction house that has eliminated buyer's premiums. So that was in fact a nice piece of boneless meat, pitted dates or an olive, whatever strikes your fancy. But that's a nice deal, no matter what you might think of the specific condition of the watch. December 4 at Christie's. An example, again, Paul Newman exotic dial, looking just like Paul Newman's own piece, save for the special inscription on the case back, from roughly 1968. That sold for $226,800 by Christie's in New York. And just to get an idea also of the kind of premium that you are paying for the exotic dial, right? Antiquorum Hong Kong for a 6239 with the black dial, silvered white chronograph registers, 35,000. Panda dial, silvered backdrop, black chronograph registers, 49,000 at Christie's, Switzerland in November. 6239 once again. 92,000 with the black dial. A tropic dial, tropic panda, so to speak, with tropical brown chronograph registers, less than 60. But you get the idea, right? We have a whole variety of pieces in different conditions. Black dial, white chronograph register, white dial, black chronograph register, tropical dials. But suddenly, if you are in fact looking for an exotic dial, and these are two pieces that were sold in this fall's auction season in Geneva by Philips. A black exotic dial for more than 310,000 US dollars. A white exotic dial, although this is a 6262. So again, with the new movement, right? With the Vajou based caliber 727, higher beats, slightly thicker case, selling for more than 210. Recently, again, just a little more than a month ago, Loop This, the online auction house, which works with a 10% buyer's premium, sold the white version of the exotic dial, 6239. And that went for less than 200,000 US dollars as well. And you can kind of see once again how the auction results can depend by the particular interest a piece catches, the kind of people in the room, the number of enthusiastic and committed bidders in the room, and a little bit of extra sauce, which is what this example of the Monaco Legends auction brought. Again, this is extremely rare. Tiffany stamp, a cosign on the dial for the exotic dial Daytona. We had talked about this watch when I was doing the preview of this. And in fact, there is a confirmation from Tiffany and Company via a letter dated June 9th, 2008. that they have in fact sold a watch with that serial number in April of 1969. So, in fact, it matches. And that special sauce brought it a hammer price more than $700,000, which, by the way, was actually right at the midpoint of the pre-auction estimated value, right? Which put it, in fact, over $1 million at the higher end of it. So that should give you once again an idea about how the market stands currently when something that is as rare as hen's teeth, as they say, and comes with some sort of paper trail that certifies their provenance beyond the particular signature. And even then, it didn't break into seven figures as the pre-auction estimate was expecting it. A similar piece, original white version of the Paul Newman exotic dial, once again 6239, from the same auction in Monte Carlo by Monaco Legends Group. Once again, a Tiffany signature on the dial. This time, a letter. The letter that accompanies it is from the Heritage Department, and that certifies that the watch was manufactured in 1968 and sold to Tiffany and Company. And that particular piece was sold for $730,000, for more than $730,000 in US dollars. So now let's go a few years back. I want to take a look at pieces between 2019 and 2021. What happened there? That's very strange. Why does it not specify the year like that? It's very strange. But we'll have to navigate it page by page. So let's go to spring of 2021 and work our way from there. Sotheby's New York sold one on June 9th of 2021 with the white exotic dial, as you can observe in an example like this, for $226,800, which, as you can see, is significantly higher than the median price. Mind you, again, that median price includes examples without the exotic dial, which, as always, is a significant source of premium, as we have seen. And this, more or less teaches us, right, at that particular segment of the market, and I know it's somewhat anecdotal, but when we look at the iconic reference with the most desirable dial configuration, the prices in the last 2 years don't seem to have changed radically, right? They're still around $200,000, maybe a little bit more premium when the watch is in genuinely exceptional condition. And that was also the case in the fall and the summer of 2021 as well. Right, where you have the June 9th Sotheby's piece, where you have the October 2021 at right, which I believe is somewhere in the Midwest, I want to say. I believe it is in the US though. And they sold a beautiful version, as you can see here, of the 6239, black exotic dial mounted on a Jubilee bracelet from the period. Sold for $230,000 on October 19th, 2021. And if we move along into the 2022, the results are not all that different. At Pandolfini in Florence on May 25th of 2022, $220,000. Philips Hong Kong, $300,000 in the May of 2022. Philips New York, right under $200,000 And again, exceptions exist, but this is how the watch is trending. And if we were to go back to, let's say, a moment in time, again, we don't want to depress ourselves too much, but let's go back to 2015, for example, if we can. Sotheby's Geneva, $62.39 with the black exotic dial. Sold on November 9th, 2015 for a little less than 100,000. Which seems to be more or less the price points at around that time. Mind you, there's still a premium associated with exotic dials over the quote-unquote run-of-the-mill versions of the same reference number. And in 2017, we see already that the prices start climbing up, right? Whereas you have a Sotheby's example on September 18th, 2017, that sells for more than 143,000 in US dollars. By the time we get closer to (2019), here we are in 2018, it seems that it has become quite normal that this is a six-figure watch, 150,000 and up, or even settling already in certain conditions, when the example is exceptional, already over 200,000, which is this particular example, sold on July 16, 2018 by Art Curio in Paris, France, for more than 220,000 US dollars. And that is, ladies and gentlemen, a reference 6239, which is the black dial version, just like this one of Paul Newman's original. Which in this case was sold for $150,000 in the summer of 2018 by Christie's for $150,000. Pump pushers, matching stainless steel bezel, and the tricolor exotic dial with its distinct and playful interplay of colors and levels. Let's take a similar look to 6241. Once again, we have some very interesting recent results when it comes to this particular reference point. We have obviously looked at some exceptional examples in precious metal earlier, which is replicated here. This is the watch that was just sold in New York by Sotheby's for more than $1.5 million. But if we look at a stainless steel example, again, the main distinction of the 6241 is the black bezel, which makes it visually actually a very different watch. But again, that's just a matter of preference. Of course, that is by definition subjective. It's an aesthetic judgment. Otherwise, the two reference numbers are the same watch, internally speaking as well. But 6241 has the black plastic bezel insert combined with pump pushers, and that is an example with the black dial that was sold on December 4th by Christie's for a little more than 195,000 US dollars. And I think you can already get a sense of it here, that people, just as people have fallen in love almost instantly with the introduction of the ceramic bezels in 2016, right? I'm not mistaken, with the 116500 LN. They have a penchant for the black bezels when it comes to references of the Paul Newman exotic dial. As you can see, these watches these days seem to trade at around $250,000 and up. And this is an example of the 6041 with the white exotic dial, Paul Newman. An example at that sold by Sotheby's on November 4th in Geneva for more than 310,000 US dollars. Christie's Hong Kong, November 25th. A black dial version of the 6241. for more than $258,000 US dollars. It's Christie's Hong Kong. Or this example that was sold by Sotheby's in Geneva on May 13, 2023 for more than $275,000. In US dollars. That's the other thing I like, by the way, about using every watch as a platform, because it does convert automatically to US currency, so we can have that uniform thing rather than me having to calculate each time from local currency. And as always, some exceptional examples seem to break the pattern, such as this one sold last summer by Phillips in New York. Again, the 6241 with the black dial, essentially a full set, box, papers, hang tags. And it sells for $635,000. Great condition. Practically a full set. Of course, that makes a difference, right? You have a hang tag that matches the serial number, right? Not just a generic tag that's period correct. You have the original papers, you have the presentation box. That does make a little bit of a difference, right? Which in this case translated to a significant premium. Sometimes, of course, tropical dials can add significant premium to a piece, such as this example, where the brown tropicalization is quite significant and noticeable, and also rather attractive, if I might say so, in the chronograph registers. Not sure if I would be able to countenance in any way, even if I were at that level. such a significant premium. It does look beautiful. 6241. Paul Newman exotic dial, white backdrop, tropicalized, warm brown chronograph registers, record of Bukhara service, a modern oyster bracelet, only the crystal changed, and this piece sold again by Philips Geneva last summer for more than 565,000 in US dollars. Since we looked at some Tiffany stamped examples of the 6239, here's an example of the 6241 that was recently sold just a few days ago, less than a week ago, by Philips in New York. Black bezel insert, pump pushers, a 6241. White Paul Newman exotic dial with the Tiffany stamp on the dial, floating under the Rolex Cosmograph writing, and a hastily scribbled inventory number under the lug, which is another hint towards the particular provenance of this watch. Late 60s, presumably 1968. Selling for more than 673,000 in US dollars. What if we were to go back in time a little bit, just like we did with the 6249? Let's go back to 2021 and look at a few results from there. And then we can go back So we're looking at the summer of 2021 right here, where in fact these watches were trending maybe slightly less than the 250,000 mark they have since crossed. Right, as you can see here, you have examples sold. Let's go a little back. That was July already. June 27, 2020, almost 211,000 for a white exotic dial Paul Newman, 6241 by Philips in Geneva. May of 2021, Philips in Geneva for almost $280,000. You can see towards the end of the year, the trend may be already intensifying. 6241 by Sotheby's Hong Kong, more than 275 on October of 2021. November of 2022, Philips in Geneva, black exotic dial selling for more than 278,000. And once again, what we're observing here more or less is the case that one, over the last couple of years, even with the crash setting in, the prices have, compared to everything else, honestly, remained pretty steady in the auction circuit, mind you, which is not the only representative by any measure of how the market trends. And once again, the other thing that's easy to observe, and that is the same as how we have seen the trends in relation to 6239 as well. And that is how there is a significant premium attached to a Paul Newman dial of the same reference as opposed to a simpler black dial with silvered white chronograph registers, or a white dial or a silver dial with black chronograph registers, which sell for much cheaper, as you see here, or fail to sell at all. So traveling all the way back in time, let's say to, again, we're not going to depress ourselves by going into the 90s or something, or even early 2000s. But why not to a moment in 2015 and then going back to 2017 perhaps. Which is fascinating. You see, when you look at this, 2014 already, towards the middle to end of the year, Art Curio Paris sells a black exotic dial version of the 6241 for more than 112,000. Antiquorum in Geneva sells a white exotic dial for more than 150,000. But nothing is set in stone, right? When you see a lot of variation there, you know, watches selling for less than six figures, watches selling for up to $150,000, watches selling, again, less than six figures. That's July 8th, 2016 at Antiquorum Hong Kong. But watches like this one sold on November 27th by Philips in Hong Kong, 2016, for more than 200,000. A white exotic dial version of the 6241. So once again, you have really a certain trajectory where the hype around perhaps one of the most desirable and competitive segments of the watch congeals in or around 2017. The prices remain pretty stable after that, with, of course, a certain boost that quote-unquote benefited from the post-pandemic craze that has since calmed down and dipped a little bit, but not significantly, especially when compared to other watches, which of course are perhaps not really comparable. Again, I started by saying that what you're looking at is perhaps the most iconic version of the most desirable sports watch, at least in recent history. And perhaps it's not even fair to compare it to the rest of the market. And here you see an example that was sold by Christie's in New York on December 6th of 2017, already for 200,000, significantly beating its pre-auction estimates at the time. And this was the 6241, which, again, thanks to its aesthetic flourish with that plastic bezel, has a premium over its metal bezel counterpart at 6239. I'm so sorry, Nick, that I didn't see your super chat earlier. But thank you. I appreciate you. At least this company will not put you on a wait list, but not a wait list. Okay, what does it mean? Then call you a month or two later with urgency to buy the watch. I don't know which company we're talking about, but I have experienced something like that from Omega. I remember when the green dial Seamaster, when it first came out, supposedly, Watches and Wonders 2022, I was at South Coast Plaza, walked into the Omega boutique there, just asked for the watch. They said it didn't come in yet, but it was one of those situations where they were really aggressive about you giving them your information, so they might call you to show you when it comes in, even if you may not be allowed to buy it. I said, why not? I mean, it's just going to drop my name with you and an email address. An entire year later, they called me to ask whether I would be interested in buying it. And I was like, well, I mean, you forced me to give you information so I could see it a year before, and you are trying to sell me an example now. I would have lost interest in it if I were actually interested in it. So it's truly strange how certain sales associates for certain brands started acting all of a sudden when watches became a mainstream thing. They kind of, they're lost in the sauce for the most part. And I think most of them, especially the people who have started very recently, who have perhaps just migrated into selling watches from another segment of luxury goods, I think at this point they're in for a rude awakening, because they were thinking perhaps it's just like ladies' handbags and it's going to be forever desirable, evergreen. Commissions will be fat, and they will keep coming in. But that's not how it works. That's not how it works even for most most Rolex watches. Again, we are, the nature is going back to normal. We are returning to normal. But yes, going back to the two references that we have examined in terms of the auction results out of the half a dozen we were looking at, the two noticeable trends remain pretty constant since these watches have become etched in the public consciousness, even in the mainstream, especially since 2017, with that incredible result that Paul Newman's own reference 6239 with the exotic dial has achieved. Once again, $17.8 million, roughly speaking, by Phillips in New York City. These watches have been the most iconic version of the most desirable sports watch. The prices have remained, comparatively speaking, quite steady, having experienced a slight boost during the pandemic craze. And even when things petered down, I think we are still at around those levels where Daytona reached a new peak as a hype watch with the boost it received from the public auction occasions that sprinkled the stardust that came with Paul Newman's proper name all over the Daytona market. And of course, the constant that follows us even further back, before the emergence of Rolex Daytonas from Paul Newman's own collection, is the premium that exotic dial versions of both the 6239 and 6241 and the premium they demand over, or they command even over, their comparable variants that don't feature the exotic dials. Now let's look at the transitional references, starting with the 6262. This is the version with the matching bezel. Once again, there's a certain edge to it, right? Just like people prefer black bezels ever so slightly over matching metal bezels, I would assume even more so after the introduction of the ceramic bezels, because that contrasting aesthetic has become much more recognizable. The transitional references of 6262 and 6264 featuring the higher beat caliber 727 are thicker and therefore can be quite desirable to a lot of buyers. I think overall they still command a little less than the 6239, being the OG reference, being the exact reference of what Paul Newman wore, and 6241 bearing the black bezel, which is an aesthetic preference for many. So we're looking at a watch 6262 sold by Philips New York less than a week ago for more than 200,000 in US dollars with the black exotic dial, pump pushers, matching stainless steel for the tachometer bezel, powered by caliber 727. Again, significant premium, as you can see, over an example with the reverse panda dial, over an example with the silver, quote-unquote, conventional panda dial. November in Geneva by Philips, the white exotic dial version of the 6262, pump pushers, matching bezel, the higher beat caliber 727, 3 hertz rather than 2.5, 21,600 semi-oscillations per hour, more than selling for more than 212,000 in US dollars. White dial sold by Philips in Geneva, November 2022, for more than 240,000. So you see that bump that is petering out in a way. October 21st in Monte Carlo by Monaco Legend Auctions. In 2022, again, a black dial version of the 6262 for more than 11,000 in US dollars. Let's look at some examples. Around 2021, there we go, for example. This shows you how even Daytona hasn't been prone to the crash. Sold in New York in 2021 in December, so about 2 years ago, a 6262 by Phillips for more than $321,000. Sotheby's in Geneva, a white dial version for more than $275,000 on November 9th of 2021. Phillips in the same auction, May of 2021, sells 6262 for more than $300,000, and an oyster 6265 for almost $280,000. Hopefully that's not going to confuse us. That was a reference number we didn't observe yet. But you see, in terms of the 6262, the transitional reference, there was a certain peak received, or achieved rather, in 2021 in the thick of the post-pandemic explosion of interest, which seems to have petered out without completely obliterating, I have to say, the market just yet. What happens if we were to go a few years back? Let's go to 2017. We have November, we have Christie's selling an example of the 6262 with the black exotic dial on November 12th, 2017 for more than 200,000 US dollars. We have Sotheby's and Christie's. First of all, Christie's in Hong Kong in the fall of 2017 again on November 26th. No, this is a 6264. That's a wrong listing. So we skip over that, but we're looking at the 6262 here, sold by Sotheby's in Hong Kong on April 1st, 2018 for almost $160,000. And then into 2018, And this is, in an important sense, when you start seeing the canonization of the watch, right? After that widely publicized and immensely successful auction sale of the OG Paul Newman for almost $18 million. So you look at Bonhams in London on June 19th, 2018, a black dial example of the 6262 selling for more than $280,000. And this is such a nice angle, by the way, on that picture. You know, this is exactly what I mean when I try to speak of the dimensionality of that exotic dial, right? Combined with a tropic bezel, so to speak, right? More domed, sorry, I don't know why I said bezel. Tropic crystal, a much more accented curvature to it that already adds a visual dimension to the piece. The step dial, the contrasting colors and finishing touches. I think it really makes this watch quite eye-catching. And if it took a lot of public transformations of perception for most people to realize that, once they did, I think it's hard to deny the attractiveness of a watch like this. And again, similarly, you have one sold in July of 2018 by Monaco Legend Auctions in Monaco, Monte Carlo for more than 284,000. Again, that's July of 2018. And that, of course, was a 6264, by the way, not 6262. So the transitional model with the bezel inserts, which adds visual detail. And again, my apologies, you know, even though these are the results that fell in front of me from 6262. Of course, you know, sometimes you have to double check. I appreciate what every watch is doing, but it's not perfect just yet. I think ultimately, when it comes to the 6262, I'm actually not surprised that we have seen more fluctuations and more of an effect of all the vicissitudes of the post-pandemic market, more than the first generation, so to speak, more than the 6239 and 6241. Because this is exactly the kind of model that doesn't, at least to me, in and of itself, has an inert selling point. It looks exactly like the original, but it is not, right? At first glance, it looks just like 6239, but it is not the 6239. Yeah, maybe there's that selling point, you know, of a more modern, higher beat movement. Yeah, it's a thicker case, which might be attractive to some. But this is, once again, one of those examples where I think a lot of people in the market perhaps went after it for a moment, because again, it's the transitional reference. There are not many out there, but in and of itself, rarity is not everything, right? Condition, as we have seen, always trumps it, but also what is rare should also have that additional pedigree, should also have an inert point of desirability. So now that we see there are comparable models within the half a dozen Paul Newman exotic dial variations that we are looking at, the 6262 kind of falls between the cracks, right? The fact that it was basically only made for about a year and is therefore in much more limited numbers, that doesn't necessarily justify a premium. If people thought for a moment, as part of that craze, that it did, that's something that they moved on from, as far as I can discern with what I examined here. So let's look at the slightly more attractive, in my humble opinion, but also I think more desirable by the markets version of the transitional generation, the 6264, which combines the higher beat movements, the caliber 727 pump with pump pushers and a black bezel insert. So in a way, the transitional counterparts to 6241. I'm taking another short break. Please hit the like button in the meantime. I appreciate all your support in the form of likes, shares, your viewership, the fact that you're in the audience, that you're contributing in the chat is great. If you do, of course, want to contribute more in the form of super chats, super thanks, super stickers, that's always welcome and well appreciated. Obviously, it keeps the lights on, and it's really allows me to devote more and more time to the channel. Of course, I'm eternally grateful to I Love Maldives, who has really pushed me to create this entire series and specifically requested an episode on the Daytona. I hope this will be, for the Daytona at least, one of many, one in a series. But you see already that we have 2 more episodes following upon this. One on Danny Roth era Breguet and one on the Reverso. And both will have a certain focus. The Danny Roth era Breguet perhaps will have more of a secondary market component than necessarily auction results. I think that market is maturing as we speak, and there will be probably many, many more Breguets from that era put up on public auction, put up for sale on public auctions. For now, we might end up looking more on secondary market listings and current listings. And with the Reverso, of course, we will have a very specific focus. Again, we're not going to take in almost an entire century, but I will try to shrink that into a single episode. And hopefully, after those 2 episodes, episode 4, episode 5, we will probably come back to the Daytona. And I would love to hear from you in the comments of this video what you would want me to focus on beyond the Paul Newman Daytona that can be the current lineup and the kind of interest it generates. You know, it started hitting the market now, so we can talk about it a little bit. But of course, since this is more of a backward-looking episode, I would say we would use something pre-ceramic. We can go into the 5-digit era and try to see what are some of the unique examples and what we can find on the auction circuit, on the secondary market as good deals that we can run after. What are the unique examples, even one-of-a-kind pieces that have been released or that have been kind of created and gifted to people. And of course, we can always look at later, perhaps, as a future idea, just throwing it out there, on a couple of generations of Rolex chronographs that have preceded the Daytona and that are usually called pre-Daytona for that reason. We can certainly do that. In the meantime, again, take a look at this beautiful Right. All right. We're back. We're looking at the 6264 in terms of auction results. Again, we're going to start with some of the most recent results and work our way back and look around 2017, late 2017, 2018, to see how the public hype affected the state of the market and how later on the pandemic, if at all, affected the state of the market for this watch. Now, I will start with the assumption that this can be in many ways a sweet spot. I've never been obsessed with ceramic bezels, especially when it comes to the Daytona, before this most recent generation, which frames it, I think, beautifully within that ring. But when it comes to hand-wound Daytonas, the Valjoux-based Daytonas, I do like the plastic bezels. I do like the black bezels. I think, especially with the exotic dial, they create such a balanced interplay of colors and levels. So this is a beautiful example of that. This particular reference. Here is one that was sold by Christie's in Geneva. Incidentally, part of the Passion for Time collection. I will report on this. This is the one that generated all that controversy, first through the involvement of the third-party guarantor, and later on by the case that the collector, Mohammed Zaman, brought against Christie's in Geneva. But this watch actually hammered at around $350,000. Last summer, on May 25th, in Hong Kong, Christie's sold an example with the white exotic dial. Once again, this is a 6264 for more than 320,000 in US dollars. And you are seeing, as we go back to 2021, November 2021, Philips in Hong Kong, white exotic dial example of the 6264. That has some provenance. And that sold for more than $450,000. Sotheby's in Geneva sold an example that was restored by that special workshop that we were talking about earlier, that I was telling you about earlier, singular in Geneva. This is a 6264, faithfully restored by Rolex, sold on November 9th in 2021 by Sotheby's in Geneva for more than $350,000. A black exotic dial on the same auction, selling for more than $275,000 by Sotheby's in Geneva. And again, this is very significant. As you see, the transitional model seems to have maybe suffered most from a kind of speculation. right? This is sold by Philips in Geneva in November of 2021 for more than 436,000. And you see with that rhetoric of only produced for 1 year, extremely rare, seems to have struck a chord, I guess, by the number of people who entered the market at the time and who knew, by definition, very little about watches in general, assumed that rare, limited in number, automatically meant significant premiums. But as you saw by the more recent results, that no longer holds true necessarily. Yes, the 6264 is rare, and it does have a premium, especially because of the desirability of that black bezel and what it introduces in it, but it's probably not the watch that is kind of napping at the heels of 500,000 that it suddenly became in 2021. Let's look at it and see if 2017 affected it. Of course, being the occasion of that public sale that almost reached 18 million. And yes, we can basically see that examples of the 6264 started jumping up significantly. From around $200,000 to $300,000 to almost 400, and they are mostly trending in that range going into the pandemic. And perhaps in this instance, the 6264 seems to be more of an outlier, holding on to at least some of the premium that it produced, that it seemed to demand due to its rarity. And of course, aesthetically, it's a very interesting watch. The combination of the pump pushers and the black bezels, the black bezel is fantastic. It does have the more modern, higher beat caliber 727. And it has that benefit of rarity, having been only produced for 1 year. So if something like that interests you, that's not something I necessarily run after. That could make the 6264 an interesting option indeed. Now we have our last two references. We're going to look at the 6265, which is a reference with the oyster case this is a thicker case, screw down pushers, but a matching bezel in stainless steel. And we are going to also look at 6263 to close off. Right now, you're looking at a watch that was sold just last month in Hong Kong by Philips for almost $490,000. The oyster case, screw down pushers, the last iteration of the exotic dial with the red accents having dropped off. This was a piece that almost reached that $500,000 mark just last month in Hong Kong, sold by Philips. And of course, you are seeing, as we go through certain examples of the 6265 in stainless steel and in precious metal, you see the significant premium that a Paul Newman exotic dial commands. And that's, of course, as always, due to rarity, but also, of course, as I mentioned, the additional visual interest. And you can think of this in a different way when it comes to the so-called Arabic dials, right? When you have, for example, the Qurayshi eagle for something like this, right? The desert eagle, as they call it also here. UAE Providence, Provenance, I meant to say, issued by their Ministry of Defense. And that is a watch that was sold in November of 2021 by Philips in Geneva for almost 410,000. Right? You see how things jump, by orders of magnitudes, by just something slight, an aesthetic flourish, a visual detail to the dial. And the exotic dial is much more than just a logo, right? It does represent that icon, but as I tried to explain in many moments during this episode, it also is much more multidimensional than the classic panda and reverse panda versions. Here is as an example of the 6265 white exotic dial, matching stainless steel tachometer bezel, oyster case, screw down pushers, which of course tighten up, which shore up the waterproof properties of the case. And this is sold in May of 2021 by Philips in Geneva for almost 280,000 US dollars. We're going back in time pretty distinctly here. August 2020. Again, pandemic has hit. Of course, the market has picked up significantly from the public recognition the globalization of the collecting craze, catapulted by the online communities and later outlets, forums, blogs, what became Hodinkee, Revolution, so on and so forth. But of course, that extreme boost with the public records that were set by Paul Newman's own watches that we talked about. This is a 6265 with the white exotic dial for more than 310,000 in August 2020 by Bonhams in London. Let's take a look at examples right around 20, late 2017, 2018, if I can find, because once again, these are pieces that are extremely desirable and that don't always, at least in olden times, they didn't used to come up on auction so often. But there we go. I spotted two interesting examples on this page. Here is one that Philips sold in Hong Kong, late November of 2017. So with the news of the record-breaking, with the all-time record-breaking sale, having traveled already from October, 6265 with the white Panda exotic dial. As I mentioned, with the oyster case, the red accents drop off. This is a watch that they sold on November 26th in 2017 at Philips Hong Kong for more than 428,000 in US dollars. And here's another example of the Panda exotic dial, oyster case, April 1st, 2018 by Sotheby's in Hong Kong. A watch that sells for more than $270,000. Now, if we go a little bit further back in time, again, not radically, nothing, we're not looking for earliest examples or something, but around 2015, 2016. And let's see if and how these pieces were trending at the time. Here's an example sold by Christie's on November 8th of 2015 with the Panda exotic dial, oyster case, screw-down pushers, matching tachometer bezel in stainless steel for more than 268,000 US dollars. That was Christie's in Geneva. And another example sold this time by Christie's in New York. Of the Panda exotic dial. This is a 6265 for $269,000 US. Once again, I think we see how the oyster case really sets a higher ceiling for these pieces, how the combination between a kind of modernity that's felt by the case construction, increased waterproofness, of course, the more modern movements, which also means larger case dimensions, all of this with the screw-down pushers as well, makes this model one of the most attractive, one of the most desirable within that half a dozen of references we looked at for the variations of Paul Newman today. It's also, of course, more or less following the same trajectory that we were explaining. Again, the usual things that we have counted, significant premium over the same reference numbers without the exotic dial. A recognizability already and an interest for their uniqueness and rarity that precedes even the public auction of Paul Newman's own watches from his collection. But these models too certainly experience an energized recognition and demand. They have also benefited from the environment, from the craze, in fact, that was created or at least intensified by the pandemic. And at the end of the day, again, these are incredibly desirable watches. So they seem to be less prone, they seem to be less affected by the comings and goings, vicissitudes, and even falls and crashes of the market than the average watch. Again, when something is so exceptional at such a higher segment of the market where the numbers are very limited, where the demand is outsized, and where those who are demanding have a lot of resources at hand, I think it's not too difficult to understand how things have shaped up in this particular way, which brings us to 6263, which is the last reference that we will discuss today, the last reference we will track in terms of the auction results today, the one that will help us close out our third installment of RAAR, where we focused on half a dozen Paul Newman variations of common hand-wound Rolex Daytona references. Once again, I invite you to the comment section already after the live stream ends to tell me what you would like me to discuss more in the same vein, in as far as Daytona goes. You can suggest other iconic models too, of course, but let's focus on the Daytona for this point. But we are looking perhaps at the most desirable. This is the 6263 perhaps the most, the highest stage of evolution that these pieces have reached. The more substantive oyster case, screw-down pushers, which emphasize and enhance the waterproofness of the case. The Panda version of the Paul Newman dial, the red accents are absent, but the interplay of colors and levels still remain by and large, and that is complemented with bezel inserts that is set within that metal ring. This is a piece sold for more than $570,000. You're looking at a black version of it by Philips in Hong Kong just last month, just in November of 2023. Philips in Geneva sold the white dial version of this piece. As you can see with those Millerige screw-down pushers. For almost $400,000. That was November of 2023. So just last month. And again, you can see the significant premium that an exotic dial commands over and against examples of the other versions of the same reference. Paul Newman Panda, almost 400,000. A Tropic Panda, a little more than 150. Panda, 126. Panda, or reverse Panda, 88, so on and so forth. So we see the same trend where there is, in fact, by orders of magnitude, again, an important premium. Of course, God forbid you see something like this, which is a tropical version of the black, in fact, the inverse Panda black exotic dial. That's sold for 1.9 by Monaco Legend Auction in October of 2023. Sotheby's in London sold a version of the Panda exotic dial. Again, an exceptional piece. Frankly, I'm not referring to the particular condition of this case, but the aesthetics of the dial as it combines with the bezel, to be frank, because otherwise this is not very enviable, but it sold for more than 445,000 in the September of this year by Sotheby's in London. May of 2023, again, a tropical version of the black dial. Sold on May 25th in 2023 in Hong Kong by Christie's for more than 690,000. The Panda dial version selling on May 12th of 2023 at Christie's in Geneva for more than 476,000. And again, I think, as much as I prefer the looks of the 6264, really, especially with the black dial, you have to admire certain aspects of this. This has the most substantive case when it comes to hand-wound Daytonas. It has all the desirable elements that people have gotten used to from the modern Daytona. The larger oyster case, the screw-down pushers, the black bezel, which is here in the form of an insert, which made a comeback for the 126 5XX generation. So in many ways, this is the quintessential Paul Newman that was perhaps at the back of their minds when they were tinkering with certain elements, bringing in other elements into the design of the Le Mans, the Centennial commemorative edition. And as you can see, this is the reference that commands the most premium among all, and perhaps also a very significant premium over its counterparts that have the more regular dials. December 8th, 2022 for the exotic Panda dial of the 6263, more than $500,000. Right? We see how the market has, in fact, adjusted. It has, in fact, corrected from some of the heights reached by it. This is one that was sold by Philips in Hong Kong in November of last year, 2022, for more than $350,000. So now what happens? The black dial, as you see, is always more desirable, even though the authenticity of certain versions being so much more harder to pin down. So let's go back a little bit. Right, June 2022. See May 2022 with the tropical version of the Paul Newman exotic panda with a tropical seconds track, sunken and thus differentiated. So very interesting and unique, sold by Christie's in Geneva on May 8th of 2022 for more than 580,000 in US dollars. Once again, a tropical dial, especially on the seconds track, sold by Philips in Geneva in May of 2022 for more than $500,000. Let's go back a few years and see how things took shape around 2017, late 2017, 2018, and how that compares to earlier. So in fact, let's do it the other way around. Let's go back to 2015, if possible. And then we look at late 2017 to early 2018. Oh, so let's look at 2015. We are examining what is perhaps the last piece of the puzzle for us tonight, the 6263, perhaps the quintessential vintage Daytona at the threshold of modernity, oyster case, screw-down pushers, black bezel, and the panda dial. This is an example that was sold by Philips in Geneva at the Watch Auction 1 on May 2015 for 379,000 US dollars. So there's already a momentum being built there. Christie's sells an example on May 10th in 2015 for more than $210,000. November 7th, 2015, Philips in Geneva sells an example for almost 340,000. In Hong Kong on November 29th, they sell an example for almost 300,000. Christie's on December 15th, 2015, sells an example for 270,000 almost. And I think we will see. So now we are moving to late 2017 to see if the auctions affect things at all, if the public results achieved by the Paul Newman. And of course, this shouldn't surprise. November 10th, Philips in Geneva sells an example for more than 410,000 of the Panda exotic dial. Christie's sells an example on November 12th, reference 6263 with the Panda exotic dial for more than $500,000. And you see how the auction circuit takes off even just by that cue it takes from the record-breaking auction. May 11th, 2018, Philips in Geneva sells an example for $492,000 and more than that. And here's an example that's really in beautiful condition, sold on May 11th, 2018. That was once retailed apparently by a famed boutique in Buenos Aires, Ricciardi, rather, I think, for more than 750, for more than $750,000. And again, you see a more systematic inscription of an inventory number on the back of the lug there. So once again, the overall estimation remains that perhaps as the quintessential hand-wound Daytona at the threshold of modernity, the 6263 with the exotic Panda dial commands a significant premium over its counterparts. It has received a significant boost by the public records broken with the help of the sale of Paul Newman's watches. But there was a recognition already of their comparative value, of their relative value, uniqueness, and rarity, as opposed to other examples of the same reference. And overall, even though there has been a noticeable downward trend, again, it's one of those watches, because of its desirability, certainly commands an important premium and has, for the most part, preserved its value along the same lines, not exactly the same, remained in the same segment. Again, if you want to buy a black dial version, which is noticeably rare and much more difficult to find, and always a kind of confusing affair whenever it comes to its authenticity, I think you should do your homework much more carefully. That can be one of the things we will discuss tomorrow. But most importantly, in the next episode, so please leave your comments. Lollipop Boy, thank you so much. I appreciate you as well. Thank you for your super chat. I'm very grateful to you, to Nick Butter, to Jake Brooks for the super chats, of course, to I Love Maldives for encouraging me to do this episode and also sponsoring it. So thank you, Maldives. This has been our third installment of the references and auction results series. I will send the link to the playlist to the chat. We have had 3 episodes so far. The first episode was on the F. Péjon Tourbillon. The second episode was on Patek minute repeaters. We have covered on for this episode perhaps the most iconic sports watch in the world in the most desirable configuration, namely the Paul Newman Daytona. And we have done that for 2 reasons. One, because that is really the iteration that shook the market in general and the auction circuit more particularly, most significantly. Obviously, Paul Newman's own 6239 created an entire myth around it. Has enormous appeal that has gone above and beyond any other watches from his collection, any other Daytonas from his collection. But I do want to continue doing perhaps more episodes on the Daytona. So if you have other segments, other reference numbers that you want me to discuss, it can be unique precious metal and gem set examples. It can be one-of-a-kind pieces that Rolex made in the Daytona line. It can be an episode that just focuses on the 5-digit and talks about Zenith Daytonas and looks for some deals on the secondary markets. It can be anything. Your comments and recommendations and suggestions go below. If you want to support the show, you know, the super chats, super stickers help. You can leave your comments as a super thanks if you want to support that way. There are other ways to support, which all have links in the description below. With that, I'm signing off. Again, the next episode you can see in that playlist is going to be on the Daniel Roth era Breguet. Hopefully I will see you Saturday night as well with a live show anyways, in either case. But next week we are gonna do a new episode of RAAR, and then after we do the Danny Roth era Breguet and the Reverso, we are gonna come back with another episode on the Daytona. Hit the like button, wear and enjoy your watches, stay safe, stay healthy. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.